Good day. Welcome to our discussion, video lecture, on Chapter 2, System Documentation. Under this chapter, System Documentation, we will discuss the importance of documentation and how we map the processes of our accounting information system. So basically, the documentation process will allow us to understand the accounting process and be able to automate this one through an immigration from manual to automated accounting information system. So, since narrative description of transactions would be difficult to understand, and also it would be lengthy, and at the same time, um, narrative documentation will not easily give us the clear picture of the accounting process. Experts and, say, developers and accountants rely on illustrations. This is a documentation where process was able to be shown to a user or to a developer or to an analyst through the use of certain symbolism, um, certain icons, okay? And then the particular documentation will show us the flow of data or information, for example, from one department to another, from one processor to another, we call them actors, and at the same time, the rationale why this process was being undertaken, and obviously the internal controls that exist in each portion or in each part of the accounting process. So under our prevalent textbooks and sources, documentation explains how a system works, including the who, we call them as actors, the what, which is the subject matter, the when, which is the timing of the process of that particular system, the where, the location, the why, which is the rationale, the idea behind it, and the how, which is the manner of doing data entry, data processing, data storage, information output, and system controls. Popular means of documenting a system include the use of diagrams, flowcharts, tables, and other graphical representations of data and information. While the use of graphical representation or documentation is the focus of our discussion under this chapter, bear in mind, class, that our system documentation is not devoid of any narrative documentation. We also include the narrative documentation because they give us the clear picture as well as the full explanation of that particular process. But the graphical representation makes it easier for us now to understand the entire process, and at the same time it will give us a bird's eye view of the flow of information from one location to another. Okay, we can easily gauge now the idea that this particular data or document comes from this department and is forwarded to another department for their perusal or for their use. So again, this graphical representation is the main focus. Remember that narrative description is a supplement. We still provide that one. It could be a handbook. It could be a different. It could be a a supplement that will create now the entire handbook of our documentation for that accounting information system. Okay? The narrative description will include a step-by-step explanation of the different components of your system. But of course, to easily understand it, we rely on our graphical representation. And this graphical representation would have to use certain symbols, universal symbols that is common amongst practitioners in system development or even accountants who do consulting jobs for accounting information system and for business consultancy in general. So again, documentation here will be graphical representation and narrative description altogether, supplementing the graphical representation. Now, what are the different documentation tools available for developers, for accountants who wanted to automate their accounting information system? Because again, class, as I've discussed in our previous videos, our accounting information system is both manual and automated. So in a manual accounting information system, that is what you have already understood and it's currently being studied in your accountancy program. Because remember, you're being taught how to record it manually, to record it debit credit, how to compute for the proper costing, for proper valuation. That is actually the subject matter of our accounting profession. But while you are already in practice, remember that the growth of the business and the complexity of the business say, for example, where you're working as an accountant or the entirety of the business, you'll definitely need to automate your accounting information system. And by automating your accounting information system, it is imperative for developers and for, say, consultants to get an understanding of your current manual accounting information system. So you will be tasked now to submit to these developers, to practitioners like SAP consultants, your current accounting information system in order for them to understand it and for you to allow them to give to get the entirety of the picture of your accounting information system, the manual side. You have to provide them certain documentation, and this is where the need now for you to be acquainted with the different documentation tools. Kasi as an accountant, you're not limited to, say, being able to do debit credit or to compute certain amounts. You also have to be well versed in terms of documentation, because being an accountant is also being an expert in documenting the processes that you allow other individuals to understand the process. Because sometimes to our mind, we already understood the entire process. But allowing others to understand it in the same clear picture that we have understood it's a tasking job, it's a tasking duty, which would require now certain documentation tools. One, the first documentation tool would be the data flow diagram, or the DFD. The data flow diagram is a graphical description of data sources, data flows, transformation processes, data storage, and data destinations. Another would be a flowchart. A flowchart is also a graphical description, but this one will be divided into several types. We have document flowchart, which will show you the flow of documents and information from one department or areas of responsibility to another department. A system flowchart, on the other hand, will show you the relationship among the input, how the input is processed, and the output in an information system. Another type of flowchart will be the program flowchart, which shows the sequence of logical operations that a computer performs as it executes a program. So a program flowchart now will show you the decision making. So for example, inside a system, a program was created that when the user will click yes, this is the next step. And if the user will click no, this is the next step. Basically, class, the entirety of your computer is basically comprised of programs that will activate now once decision is made. You right click your mouse, there will be selections. Once you click one of the selection, it will provide a decision. It's basically a decision tree mapped already under the computer program, which relies now on the decision made by the user. If the user will click this or not, it depends on what will happen next on how the user will decide. So basically, that program inside the computer is called a program flowchart. We also have business process diagrams, which are graphical descriptions of the business processes used by a company. All right? Now, you can check in this illustration in the right side of the slide deck the documentation types. We have software documentation, which would include now product documentation and process documentation. Say, for example, if you've purchased an accounting information system software like SAP, SAP would include now a software documentation that will tell users now and how to use the system, and at the same time respond should there will be problems, the need to troubleshoot it, or to rectify certain errors that may rise along the way. The software documentation will include the product documentation and the process documentation. The process documentation will tell us now how the software was planned, the estimates that included as to the costing of these software and how it was developed, the schedules, the reports involving the development of the software, and other working papers. All right. The product documentation, on the other hand, will include the system documentation and the user documentation. The system documentation will include now requirement documents, how it was designed and architecture, the source code, because usually you have to give up the source code of a program or software, especially in accounting information software, in order to allow the users to bend, to adopt, and to customize this accounting information system to additional needs and customizations that it may encounter in the near future along the way as they continuously use and improve the accounting software that they're going to use, because sometimes an accounting software may not envisage everything about the business. There could be transactions that may not have been included initially, and therefore it's important that the business or the organization would have the source code from the developer to allow the flexibility of improving it or changing it to match the needs of the business. So system documentation may also include maintenance or help guide, and this is very important, especially for if problems may arise, so there's a need for troubleshooting. So the maintenance or help guide will allow the business own programmer to check this one and understand it and guide and how to respond to these errors. Another part of the product documentation would be the user documentation. And this user documentation will be divided into two types. The end users, this is the documentation intended for the users generally. For example, if you are an employee of the entity and they're assigned to be accounts payable processing, so they would refer later on now to user documentation pertaining to accounts payable that will guide them now in how to process accounts payable. What are the modules, what are the windows that they have to open in order to process an accounts payable as they record it using your accounting information system. Another documentation will be available for our system administrators. They are given a more access to the system because they basically govern the entire system. So this could be your web admin, your IT admin, or your head IT guy, and they basically decide, or they basically provide now access to users, control security, and maintain say the capacity of the system, because sometimes the memory or the data of your business may no longer be accommodated or can no longer be accommodated by the system. So there would be a need for upgrade. So the administrators will refer to this, the system administrators documentation, as guidance of how they're going to do it and what will be the effects later on if there will be changes. So at least they are not left groping in the dark. So documentation basically is a guidance. All right. Now, let's proceed to the first tool, which is the data flow diagram. A data flow diagram is a graphical representation that includes the description of the flow of data within an organization. Now, there are the most common symbols used in a data flow diagram is shown now in your in the table in this particular slide deck. We have data sources and destinations. We have data flows, transformation processes, and data stores. So basically, they are self-explanatory. The use of the rectangle will will show you that this is the source of the data, and should data will transfer to another rectangle, it means that the rectangle where the arrow points will be the destination. So it's basically the source and the destination. The arrow now will represent the data flow. Obviously, The endpoint where it is plain, it would start from the data source. The pointed arrow will obviously turn to the destination. Should data class will come from a source and will enter in a circle, it means that that circle will involve now a transformation. This will pertain to the process that transform data from input to the output. Okay? And we sometimes call this one as the bubble. Now, if you have two lines that are parallel with each other, well, the bottom line is bold. We call them as data stores, meaning the data that rests there will no longer be transferred, meaning will no longer have an arrow because it's already the storage. It is the end point of that particular data. And the orange triangle refers to the internal control, and they are usually numbered and explained by an accompaniment of a table. Because you have to explain the rationale why internal control is placed there. What was the purpose of the internal control? Because sometimes it may not apparent to the naked eye that why is there an internal control here? And then you have to explain that you wanted to ensure that there are no say errors, for example, or there is independence, accuracy, and completeness in this particular process, hence the presence of an internal control. Right? Now check a sample data flow diagram. If you notice, from one source, data flows to B, which is an arrow, but it is accepted not by a source but a process, and therefore data now is processed under C. Okay, and then it will flow now to another process, which is letter F, and then the destination will be K. Note class that under the process F, data is being stored already. That's why there are two parallel lines there, right? That's an example of a top level data flow diagram. Now, let's check a data flow diagram with respect to a customer payment. So obviously the source will be the customer. The payment will flow now into the payment processing. And then once payment processing is done, a copy of a deposit slip is prepared, and the deposit slip will now be forwarded to the bank together with the cash that will be deposited. Now, the payment processing in letter C will result now to the preparation of a remittance slip or a remittance information. And then it will be forwarded to the accounts receivable department, and the accounts receivable department will process this one, and a copy of which will be stored by the accounts receivable department to evidence now the payment made by the customer to that particular accounts receivable. No. And later on, the destination will be the credit manager, which will now be updated of the payments made by the customer, and will now inform the credit manager that this particular customer has indeed paid timely or regularly the accounts receivable. Now, another data flow diagram, if you will see there, is for payroll processing. And if you'll notice, there are two sources of data, which will be the department pertaining to manufacturing, because manufacturing will have the hold or control of the time cards, which is basically the hours spent by the employees in the manufacturing department. And then the human resources will forward now the employee form and charge form that will include now all the attendance of other employees, and it will be processed. Okay, and data will now be forwarded. The payroll report will be forwarded to the management for their review and approval, checking now that this is the total payroll to be paid for this period. Data will be forwarded now to the bank for the preparation of the payroll check, or in the common practice, which is the debiting now of the total amount of payroll from the corporate account, and then crediting now to the individual bank accounts of the employees. And then the forward of employee checks or pay slips to the employees, and of course the forwarding of data to the government agencies for the filing of the corresponding withholding taxes on compensation and other taxes related to the payment of payroll or compensation to your employees, staff, and workers. Now, note class that there are 5 data processing activities. which is to update the employee payroll master file, which will include now the information relevant to the employee, such as the employee's biodata, educational attainment, current pay, and everything about that particular employee, say pertaining to his evaluation. It may include say competence, trainings, or seminars attended. And then the second will be the employee compensation handling, which is done on a regular basis, usually by monthly. Third is to generate now management reports. Fourth is the payment of the corresponding taxes with respect to payroll. And fifth is to post entries to general ledger to reflect now the affected accounts, such as salaries, expenses, the reduction of cash should it be paid upon payment now of payroll, right? Now, another example here will be a level 0 diagram on payroll processing. Note that this is a top level payroll processing diagram that will show you now a more detailed data flow diagram compared to the simple one that we have shown in the previous slide. Here, there is already a specification of how the employee payroll file is being updated, and specification on the preparation of reports, the payment of taxes, general ledger, and pay employees. Now, if you refer to the next level, which is level 1, it will further detail now a particular process. Okay, for example, here, payroll, the process 2.0, which is the payment of employees, you refer to level 1 and you'll say that 2.1 will include the processing of the payroll, which will include now the acceptance of time cards from the manufacturing department, the retrieval of employee information from the payroll file or the employee master data or master file, referring now to the existing tax rates or the schedular income tax tables for individuals, and then preparing now or forwarding this information to the payroll register that will now result to the preparation of cash disbursements. And of course, the cash disbursements will include the payroll check preparation, which will be forwarded now to the bank, and the payroll cash disbursement voucher. And of course, the sending of employee checks to the employees as payment of their salary or compensation. Now let's proceed to flowcharts. Now, flowcharts class is a pictorial analytical technique used to describe some aspect of an information system in a clear, concise, and logical manner. Flowcharts record how business processes are performed and how documents flow through the organization. They are also used to analyze how to improve business processes and document flows, and most flowcharts are drawn using a software program such as Visio, which is the most common program because it's part of Microsoft Office. Or if you are more, say, if you wanted more sweat or blood, then you use Word or Excel. But for me personally, I enjoy using PowerPoint for my flowcharts and for other documentation. While it may not be as flexible as Visio, I like PowerPoint because how quick I incorporate my own designs and my own color themes, or like overall design of my documents, and I can easily convert it into PDF. Flowcharts, data flow diagrams, also use a standard set of symbols to describe pictorially, meaning through pictures, the transaction processing procedures that a company uses and the flow of data through a system. So there are 4 categories of symbols in flowcharts. First will be the input-output symbols. Second will be the processing symbols. Then we have the storage symbols and the flow and miscellaneous symbols. So it we're actually familiar because they basically are the same with the data flow diagrams. But of course, there are more complicated symbols because they're already categorized into 4. So let us now check these common flowchart symbols used. For an input-output symbols, we have here the symbol for a document, And if the document is multiple copies, you have to prepare multiple copies. It will just be replicated with numbers in the right corner. Then we also have an electronic output symbol. These are information, but the output is not printed or paper, but rather being displayed by an electronic screen or a device such as a terminal, a monitor, or the PC screen. We also have the electronic data entry. This will be the device used to enter or to input now data. It could be a computer, a terminal, a tablet, or a phone because it's an electronic data entry. Obviously, dili pwede ang books of accounts because it's not electronic, right? And then we have electronic input and output device, which is basically an electronic data entry that will also include an output device, such as a personal computer, because it's both input and output at the same time. And basically, most electronics are already input output. Now, we also have we have also the processing symbols. We have a rectangle for computer processing, and like a data flow diagram, which is a circle as processing, here it's a rectangle for computer processing, which usually results in the transformation of data to information. And of course, this inverted, I'm not sure what you call this shape, but this will represent a manual operation, not computer or automated. Okay? This is a manual operation. Then we also have the storage symbols. Okay? The cylinder there will represent now the database. This is where data are stored electronically. And if you have already encountered this in one of your other subjects, database is actually a collection of tables where data are collected in a logical manner, where a particular document or a particular type of information are recorded in a row in a particular table. Because database is basically a tabular source of tabular storage of information, but they are in a way retrieved by the system and show you in your screen in a manner that you can easily identify. But if you go to a database at the back of your system, they are not presented in a manner that you can easily understand or in a manner like a document or your graphical user interface. They're basically just a collection of tables like Excel's, tables, endless collection of tables with different rows containing now data. So a particular information will probably be one row of data. And each column now represents a particular say type of information or type of data that will say that will be the basis now of how logical that particular data, if they are collected together as a particular information. Say, for example, you have columns for dates, you have columns for item description, you have columns for item code, you have columns for quantity. One row will refer to one document. Second row will be another document. And the different columns will be the different parts of that document. That's basically a database. Then you also have the magnetic tape, and then the inverted triangle with an N, which is a paper document file, which indicate now for ordering sequence, we'll have to identify if it's N, numerical, A, alphabetical filing, or D, if it is sorted by date. And of course, the italic italic square or rectangle will be the journal or ledger, which is the paper-based accounting journals and ledgers. And for flows and miscellaneous symbols, these are the symbols used to represent now the flow of document or the process, which is basically an arrow. A zigzag arrow that looks like a lightning is a communication link, which is the transmission of data from one geographic location to another via communication lines. This could be should a particular segment of your accounting information system is not online, but rather they just send you the summary of the transactions entered in order for the main accounting information system to accept it for processing. Then you use this bolt type of arrow to give you that this is a communication link. The small circle is an on-page connector. Should the first page is not sufficient or not enough to describe or to show you the entire process, the on-page connector will show you when where is the connecting part of this particular flowchart, right? We also have an off-page connector, but an on-page connector, it's a connecting part of one process to another that has been discontinued because of lack of space in the document, but the continuation is at the bottom in the same document. An off-page connector is when you turn the next page, or it's another page altogether from where you left off or where the first part is included. We also have a terminal, and then the decision making, which is the diamond, and then we have the annotation, is basically a description of comments or explanatory notes as clarification. Note that in decision making class, for like say this diamond, one side will connect to the no, and the other side will connect to the yes, because there are only two decisions made not or to be made, either to push through, which is to yes, or to back out or not to push through, which is the no. So that's how decision making step is featured or shown in your flowchart. Now, we also have a flowchart of a payroll processing system that you can basically study or look into an understanding of how payroll processing system and documents flow from one department to another. An example would be from the human resources. There are two documents which will be prepared, which is the employee changes, should there be changes now to employee information, and the new employee data. From the various departments, you have the time cards, which basically reflect now the hours spent in work of these workers. And then what will happen now for these documents prepared by the human resources is to update the employee payroll file and store forms in a file. While the time cards will use now in the preparation of paychecks and payroll register, which will now result to the preparation of the time cards, payroll register, and employee checks. These are now forwarded to what we call the payroll report. But note that they are filed class and they're filed by A. It's alphabetical. Okay? And then if you notice, there is an on-page connector, which is number or letter B, after the preparation of the tax report, and it will continue now on the preparation of tax payment and cash disbursement or check disbursement voucher. Note that from the preparation of the documents like time cards, payroll register, and employee checks, they are now forwarded to or consolidated to prepare the payroll register. And the payroll register now will be the basis of the payroll department to prepare the payroll check and the check disbursement voucher. And then these will now be filed by date upon payment now of payroll. Right? Now, what are the different types of flowcharts class? Now, we have document flowcharts. They are used to illustrate now the flow of documents and data among areas of responsibility within an organization. The document flowchart will tell you the flow now or transmission of one document to another department for their perusal, and trace now a document from its cradle to its grave, showing now each document that originates from it, and this document is forwarded to another department that serves as a basis or verification of that department's main report or another report which arises from that particular original document. The distribution of the copies of the document to various users in various departments, the purpose of such document, the disposition, and everything that happens as it flows through the system. Another type of flowchart will be the internal control flowchart, which is used now to describe, analyze, and evaluate internal controls. Now, they are used to identify now which internal controls are weak and inefficient, and to provide now inadequate, like say for example, if that particular internal control provides inadequate communication flows, or there is insufficiency of segregation of duties, unnecessary complexity in document flows, or procedures responsible for causing now wasteful delays. Now, system flowchart, on the other hand, depicts the relationships among systems, input, processing, storage, and output. And of course, the program flowchart that illustrates now the sequence of logical operations that are performed by a computer in executing a particular program. Now let's proceed to business process diagrams, or BPD. Now, we've discussed, or we've mentioned a while ago, that BPD is a visual way to describe the different steps or activities in the business process. The business flow process diagram is basically, class, a diagram showing you the different processes in doing business, but rather the focus here is rather on the flow of the flow of the process of the business, rather than the flow of certain documents from one department to another. An example would be if the activities in the revenue cycle, which includes now receiving an order, checking your customer's credit standing, whether to allow now that this particular sale be made or done on account, verifying now inventory availability, and confirming customer order acceptance. Like in other cycle as well, like say expenditure cycle, they would include also the shipping of goods ordered, the billing of your customers, and collecting customer payments. These different components now of the different cycles, they may be shown now in a business process diagram to show you the step-by-step process of this particular cycle. And notwithstanding the fact that you already showed this one, the particular cycle, through the flow of documents in, say, for example, in your document flow diagram. Here, the business process diagram will show you the actual process, the start or the beginning of the process, the end, the actual activity in the process, the decision to be made, the flow of data or information is indicated by the arrow. But when the arrow is intermittent, meaning not hindi siya tuloy-tuloy na straight arrow, but ano siya, para siyang um, intermittent arrow, it's an annotation information that helps explain the business process. You use that arrow now and then point it to a box which will include now the explanation of the business process. And it is a bolded dashed arrow that will direct you to the location where the explanation is placed, right? This is an example of a business process diagram on payroll processing. In fact, when I was still an SAP consultant, this is the common type of diagram that I use, because basically it includes already the activities performed and the actors themselves. They are specified. Like, say, for example, the actual employee that will do that particular process or that particular entry of data or information, they are all reflected in the business process diagram. Who does it, what particular position is doing it, and from one department to another, right? So you can connect this business process diagram on the other diagrams reflecting or showing you the payroll processing, and you basically can create now a clearer picture rather than listening to endless hours of narrative explanation. Okay, because that is the point of system documentation, using graphical or pictorial representation. Because sometimes our brains, human brains, are wired in a sense that understanding it in a clearer, concise manner or through symbols would be easier rather than understanding a narrative description. While we do not discount the importance of narrative description for our more in-depth understanding, because a narrative description is basically foolproof. This is basically the most comprehensive, most complete description. But in order for us to understand it clearly, easier, we basically refer it to the graphical representation, which is the focus of our chapter in system documentation. So that ends our discussion on chapter 2, system documentation.